All right, so welcome everybody. This is exciting for us. This is the first in a series of webinars that we're planning at the National Center on Adoption and Permanency. We hope that they are informative and insightful and useful and helpful and all of those things. We want them very much to be informed by all of you. Our mission is to move policy and practice in the world of child welfare from the current model, what it's always been, which is, you know, every child deserves a safe, permanent, loving family, right? So it's all about placement, to a new paradigm, it's where policy and practice are. We certainly include placement or help for the family that needs help so that it can stay intact. But what we've been missing for all these decades, all these years, is a different target. And it's the one we're putting up, moving policy and practice so that family success is the goal. Everything else comes along the way, but we need to help families succeed, whether they're families of origin or new families. They need services, they need supports, they need all sorts of help. And we know that there are lots and lots of families, tens of thousands, who are safe, permanent, and loving, and life is really tough every day. One thing that I'll give you a little surprise that we haven't yet formally unveiled is that Sharon, who most of you know, is conducting a series of interviews, first with NCAP folks, and then we'll spread out from there. Look, she's calling them the legacy interviews, but I don't know if we'll, I don't want to feel like too much of a legacy, but these are interviews of what have we learned over the years, what can we share that it can inform better policy and practice. They're wonderful interviews that Sharon has done. They are, again, not yet featured, but they're on our website. And Graham Wright, who you'll see is one of us and has been doing the technical work for us. Graham will put the URL for the interviews in the chat. So please take a look when you can. So you're going to hear about the workbooks, you're going to hear about their purposes. Obviously, the workbook is really for the families. And so the professionals on this call, again, of whom we have many, you know, we're sort of the conduit to make sure that people are getting the assistance they need. I will leave it to Allison and Sharon to go into the details, and I will start by asking Sharon an opening question, and then she will speak for about a couple of questions on which she'll speak for about 20 minutes. And then I'll do the same, asking Allison a couple of questions that will last another 20 minutes. And then we'll have about the same amount of time, probably a little less, for Q&A. But again, add your questions, even if they can't get answered today, and we will take them very seriously, and they will help us to decide what do we do next, both in our work and in our webinars. And with that, Sharon, you wrote an incredibly, I say that with some humor, it's a great book. I mean, it is, and we can all raise our hands and attest to it. But you wrote such a complete book on the topic of the 7 core issues. So what then motivated you and Allison to add a workbook to the mix? And what do you hope to accomplish with it? You know, who would you recommend use it? Go to town.
Well, I was thinking a lot about whatever moved us to take another 2 years to write a workbook. And I will mention that Allison's been taking another year writing a 3rd workbook, which will be for children and teens to help them look at their core issues. You know, the book itself offers some wonderful healing at the end of every chapter. But our goal is to kind of equip people into a deep dive into the core issues, both in preparation for fostering, adopting, becoming a kinship family, and also for those folks already in the trenches who realize that they've been triggered by issues that they hadn't expected to be buttons that could be pushed. And so we decided it was important to walk people through a journey of exploration. And it took me back to my own experience as an prospective adoptive parent at that time. I was already a professional in the field. I was already parenting a 6-year-old to whom I'd given birth. And I thought when we moved towards adoption that I was a shoo-in. Not true. What I learned very quickly is that my learning and experience was no match for my internal processes, from my own, and by the way, very good, very happy childhood, but the internalized messages that I was carrying into my parenting, because we all learn to parent from our parents. So if we don't step back, and don't forget, we're children when we're learning that, if we don't step back, we really don't have an opportunity to understand those messages and how they might either tap into our vulnerabilities or our strengths. So I wish I'd had this book. I wish every family had to have a book that would help them to look at themselves. I wonder if we could talk to our own parents, if we might say, gee, I wish you'd examine this part of yourself before you were my mom or dad, which is not to say they did a poor job, but to realize that our vulnerabilities are tapped into very, very easily as we attach to another human being. And that's the beauty of attachment. It allows us to open our hearts and get close to somebody else, but both our strengths and our shadow sides will surface in that process. And isn't it wonderful to be able to be prepared for that? So what I'm going to do is address in this first half how this workbook could be used for folks who are not yet parenting by adoption, foster care, or relative care. And Allison will be jumping in the second half, looking at how it is for those folks already in the trenches whose buttons are being pushed, who are feeling in over their head, who may be feeling a bit like they're drowning. So let's remember that every strength can be a weakness, and every weakness can be a strength. And that without knowing what our vulnerabilities are, we are open for robbing ourselves and our children of the joy of being part of a family. Children tap into those vulnerabilities, not just as babies when they won't stop crying and we can't comfort them. And they do it as they get older and they get mouthier and they get pushier. And then when they're teenagers and they're getting ready to individuate, and even as adults, our relationship with our children can tap into those sides of ourselves that we didn't even know existed. We all have fantasies about our relationship with our children over time. And this book helps us to look at those fantasies realistically and see where they're rooted. If our child is different than those fantasies, then this book can help you to have your needs met while you examine, pardon me, I said that wrong, but it can help you to meet the needs of your child while you look at your wants. What did you want and what do they need? And how do you bridge that after those vulnerabilities have been tapped into? I wonder, and I'm looking at notes every once in a while because I know we have a limited time. I want to make sure that I cover the basics for you. The big book has a lot of exercises, but this is a journey. This is a journey into self that takes time. And I've already had a few therapists mention to me and social workers mention to me that they'd like to pull out an exercise here or there and use it as is. And there's positives to that. It can be useful. But the truth is the book represents a journey. It's a really getting to know yourself at a very deep level. So we would be encouraging you through groups, through therapeutic interventions, through giving this out to families before they adopt, when they're coming through education in your programs, encouraging them to get the workbook and do that work. What a wonderful way to shepherd them into parenting in this alternative way, and to recognize ahead of time where they might be triggered in that process. What is the purpose of the book? What are we hoping to accomplish? Well, We'd like you to have good outcomes. We'd like you to not have emotional or actual disruptions. We'd like you to lower stress, to keep yourself physically and emotionally healthy. So if for any of us, and man, that puts me right at the top of the list here, for any of us who would say, I wish I knew then what I know now, I probably would have parented my children differently. And perhaps we would have had, and even more importantly, they would have had a different outcome as they moved into adulthood. And so this feels incredibly important to me in terms of really building on that successful family model. It's so important. So who should use this book? Well, anybody, as I said, who's contemplating growing their family by adoption, foster care, or relative caregiving. Parents in the trenches, which I know Alice is going to talk about, whose children are triggering, pushing all their buttons, where they know they're missing something and they can't quite figure out what it is. What's missing here? What's happening to me? Why am I turned into somebody different than I thought I would be as a parent? I think all social workers, all therapists, all group leaders who want to assist individuals on their parenting journey ought to be familiar with the workbook. And again, not dividing it up into little pieces, but really recognizing that the book is a journey. And I've already suggested to some folks that they really start support groups where families are getting ready for this and they work on that workbook together. That, you know, that they go home, they do the exercises, they come back, and in a supportive, loving environment, they can talk about what they've learned about themselves. So it's a real opportunity for growth and enlightenment. So that's my answer to that question. It's, as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about it.
So, Sharon, we're gonna condense time here a little bit to enable the Q&A. You've really answered a lot of the second question I had, which is how will not what is it, but how will it actually help people who are thinking about becoming kinship, foster, adoptive parents, whatever, and how will the tools and activities in the workbook help them feel more empowered, feel stronger and more able as they deal with the children who have suffered. You know, the kids are the ones who suffer the trauma. We're trying to help them get through. Can you just briefly elaborate on what you've already told us to the sort of the how?
Absolutely, because I think, first of all, we have to remember that children and parents write a symphony together, but the parents are the conductors of the orchestra. And how can they lead if they don't understand who they are? If they don't understand how to pick up that baton and lead this child through their core issues because they've examined their own. So I think it's real important to know that it has everything to do with the raising of children. That's one of the reasons. They're very easy exercises, but they lead into a very deep inner exploration. It's digestible, it's conversational in style, so it shouldn't overwhelm families. It's a roadmap, it's a guided journey to a deeper understanding to avoid the landmines that all parenting includes. But because of the added core issues of the families that we're talking about here, the landmines are trickier. They show up in places we didn't expect. So it's to save people, and especially our children, from unnecessary losses. And part of that then is for parents to understand their losses and what could be triggered again if they are unhealed. It's about helping them to address any fears or concerns they have about being rejected by their children or the birth first family or their own extended family, and therefore setting up a less rejecting environment for their children. It's to help them to avoid issues of shame and guilt. Remember that the losses are lifelong and life-altering. And so this book is important in terms of bringing to the surface those issues. For families that are saying, yes, they're open to open adoptions, or they're open to a sibling set, or they're open to parenting children across racial lines or across cultural lines, there are exercises to help them to really think that through. What does that mean? What does openness mean to them? What does it mean to open up your family boundaries to outsiders, to expand your family to people who may be very different from you, to a child who may be very different from you? So the book takes on all those added layers that families have to consider when they're moving into adoption and foster care. We ask people to look at who they are today and how they think each individual child who comes home, either as a sibling group or one after another, may change them, may impact them. Who are they at their core? And what kind of an attachment dance have they learned? And how are they going to teach that to their children? Because if their attachment dance has been impacted by their own trauma, their own losses, they're going to step on each other's toes, because clearly the children have the same. So how are they going to understand how to do that dance? Who brings them solace in the storm? Where do you go to when you need advice? Who are your mentors? Who are your parents that you turn to in the world? So knowing oneself is a form of mastery. It brings self-awareness and important skills, and it allows you to be the good guide for your child's journey. And that's why I think it's important that people use this workbook, Adam. I feel, again, very strongly about that.
Hey, Sharon, one thing I am certain about is you feel very strongly about this.
You know what? I think it's important to know when you're passionate about a project.
Oh, if we're
Yeah.
not passionate about this and helping kids, we ought to do something else for a living.
Absolutely so. Absolutely so. So the book was important to us, and we're very aware that a lot of people are not going to read an almost 500-page book. We want them to, and we certainly hope every therapist on here has read the book and is using the material. But the workbook is user-friendly for parents. And that's our way of directly linking into the core of a family.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Great, great. I'm watching the clock. I'm going to move quickly to Allison so we have a good time. What is it? How do you bring that into the moment, right? For parents who are currently parenting kids today, now, not the prospective ones that Sharon discussed, but the ones who are dealing with issues every day of their lives, because they have kids who have troubled histories. Can you talk a little bit about the workbook for those folks?
Sure. Actually, I feel, Adam, that it was really built very specifically for parents in the trauma trenches. And we call it that very specifically, in the trauma trenches. A child who suffered tremendous trauma shouldn't be in that trench, that war, that battle alone. So parents do jump in. We jump in. I want parents to jump in. Our parents have absorbed so much vicarious trauma. Often what sets in is compassion fatigue. How long can you be in that trench? One of the main reasons, and again, I so love listening to Sharon, because we share this passion about why it was so important to write the workbook, kind of the partner book to the 450-page, like content-heavy theoretical framework. But how do you make every part of this accessible to the parent that's in the trenches? They're not going to sit and read a 450-page book, right? They're like, give me something now, I'm drowning. I want you to imagine it's like I'm drowning in the deep end of the pool. I'm drowning. I jumped in to save my child and I'm drowning. You know, and if you're a professional, we're in front of parents every day that feel this way. It's often why they can feel as intense with us as they do. I'm suffering, I'm angry, I'm struggling. Where's the supportive resource that's built for me. And this is where really for the simple reason we wrote the book I don't know that we do enough, us professionals, with the right kind of supportive resources. I want all of us professionals, social workers, therapists, mental health professionals, to be really competent in the core issues, attachment and developmental trauma, to meet parents where they are, right? So that's really why the workbook was built, to give parents very quick, fast tools that guide them into their own internal process. As Sharon was saying, what are my attachment triggers? What's my attachment history? All of this for each of us is really embedded and encoded in a sensory-oriented way, often functioning outside of awareness. So if I'm not really aware and attuned and connected to my own parental identity, my own trauma triggers, how does it feel to be me as a mother, me as a father, my role? I have a parental identity. How am I feeling through all of this? We want parents to be able to have what they need to explore and understand their own triggers, so they're not co-escalating with their children, because it's really the easiest thing for all of us. All of us get stuck. Each and every one of us has these triggers. If we don't deeply understand our own internal process, we get stuck with our children. And one of the things we know is that really across this nation right now in our residential treatment centers, and I'm pretty connected to many of the residential treatment centers that are out there, 40% of children in those treatment centers are kids that were adopted, sometimes not going back to the families that adopted them. Some children have second adoptions. And when I look at the onus being on us, and I always say us as the professional community, I just think we need to make sure we're evolving our resources and making sure that it's not just therapy for the sake of therapy, because your average therapist is not skilled enough. And our parents get that. If you asked our parents right now, how many therapists have you been to? They might say 5, 6, 8, 10. How many were skilled and versed in developmental trauma, attachment and permanency, the core issues, to really meet not just the child where they are, but to meet the parent where they are, with what the parent needs. If our parents are drowning in the deep end of the pool, then our children are drowning. So we wanted to create a process, as Sharon was saying so beautifully, a process that helped parents really get connected to what their needs are, and really facilitate a healing process for parents. So every activity is really scaffolded to create and facilitate the parent having tools that help them, one, understand thyself, maybe even heal thyself, so we can be that facilitator of our child's healing. Because what we know, and I always say this as a therapist myself, I cannot heal your child. If you come to me thinking I'm going to heal your child, I'm going to be like, oh, I don't have any power to heal your child. But the most intimate relationship a child has is the parent-child attachment relationship. So we want to unleash the healing potential in that relationship. So attachment and parental identity and the parent being really empowered. We actually built and constructed the workbook to be extremely empowering to parents, because our parents that get compassion fatigue can come to us and they have no more hope. They're ready to throw in the towel. They're not just giving up on their child, they might be giving up on themselves. I feel like a piece of crap. Sorry to be frank, but that's often what we hear from our parents who feel tremendously overwhelmed after maybe years of being in the trauma trenches with their child. So I hope that helped. I'm going to take a little break and let Adam segue to question 2.
Yeah. So I'm taking just a quick thought, because you, as you said, people will say I'm on my 5th, 6th, 7th therapist. Years ago, NCAP did a very informal survey asking adoptive parents with tough kids, how many of you have gone to a therapist? And, all the hands went up. How many of you had therapists who did more harm than good? and almost all the hands went up. So those therapists, forgive me for being this blunt, but need this book. I mean, we need to train therapists across the country in their programs. Now, there are several good programs that are working to do that. But meanwhile, and for those therapists as well, you know, some guidance that's really hands-on clearly would be very helpful. And I think that NCAP tiny anecdote really shows it. And I'm sure you've all had very similar experiences. So, Allison, what you're really doing in this book, I think, in the workbook, is guiding parents, of whom we have many today on the call, guiding them through an introspective process, right? How is my parenting? What is the style? What are the benefits? What are the identity issues, the triggers, the interventions, and so forth? What do you want parents to know, the ones in the trauma trenches, as you call them, to know how this will help them? Again, the how I asked for Sharon. How will this help? And maybe even an example or two to illustrate how that plays out.
Mhm. Well, the how, we've constructed the workbook in particular to be incredibly digestible for every parent. As parents ourselves, and working on the front lines with parents in the trauma trenches, what do they need? Every part of this workbook was put in front of parents in the trenches, all the activities, all the exercises, and it's very strengths-based, because we want parents, one, to have hope, always realizing that growth and healing is very possible, and not just for their child, for the unhealed parts of ourselves. And we all have unhealed parts of ourselves. The losses that Sharon was referring to, in fact, the chapter 1 is a very deep dive into losses, and not just the losses connected to the experience of being a member of the constellation, being a foster parent or a kinship parent or an adoptive parent, but the broader losses we may have experienced in our own childhood. Was there abandonment? Was there a parent that was mentally ill or struggled with addiction? Or many of us have unhealed wounds that don't really surface until we're in the attachment or on the attachment dance floor with our child. So the process that we've constructed really also helps counter some of the messages parents may get from the outside world. Parents, we have a tremendously stressful environment right now, where the outside world can send a lot of messages to parents around the expectations of a parent and our social identity. You're such an amazing parent, and you did such a great thing, and your child's so lucky. And these messages where parents can end up feeling like, I don't feel like I'm doing such a great job, or this is harder than I thought it was, and I feel like I'm failing. And maybe not sharing any of those things with any other parent. It can be a very isolating experience, which is why we really encourage the workbook to be done in a support group or in your home study group, or with other parents that are in the trenches with you, to pull out an activity from the attachment section. There's an attachment questionnaire, so we can unpack our style of attachment and figure out where our trauma triggers may be. Why am I so triggered by my child's anger? Anger is such a big issue. We spend a lot of time in the book on grief, loss, shame, and anger, that we have as a culture been pretty repressed in our ability to really express our own anger. So anger comes out quickly with our children. If our child's angry, we tend to get really angry back at them. So to be really helping parents gain some insight into what's underneath anger. There's always other emotion underneath anger, always. There's often deep hurt, deep pain. How many old hurts do we as parents hold on to? So we really, again, kind of unpacking a very complex process around our attachment style and this thing called our parental identity, that once we're a parent, it's one of the biggest shifts any human can go through is becoming a parent. And how much do we really talk about the becoming a mother or the becoming a father, and how I feel about myself in this role. Do I feel good about this role? Do I feel like I'm being successful with my child? Am I helping my child heal some of their old trauma wounds? Or do I feel like I'm drowning along with my child? And that's a me issue. It's not always about the child. And it's sometimes what we see folks coming in, or our parents coming into crisis, where they're coming in saying, fix my kid and everything will be fine. And we wanted to take the opposite approach, where we really wanted to create and build a more internal process, because we think that's what's missing out there, to actually create something that addresses my needs as the parent and helps me understand thyself and maybe even heal thyself, so I can participate more in the healing of my child.
Great, great. Thank you, Allison. So I'm going to well, is it too risky to unmute everybody? We'll hear dogs and tin cups and all of that. So, so please, you are all enabled to unmute yourself. So please, we would love to hear your questions, and they don't have to be questions. They can be comments about what you've heard, comments about what you've seen in your own practice or in your own lives, that you think that you want to share with us. And anything that, going back to the beginning of this meeting, anything that you think we can do at NCAP that furthers the mission, because this is all in furtherance of mission, right? We're not just putting out books for the hell of it. We're putting out books like this because we think they can help. And so we want to hear from you on other ways we can do that.
Adam,
So with that, with apologies.
Phoenix, go ahead.
Yeah, go right. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you both for this this little webinar. I'm very excited to check out the workbook, and thank you, Adam, for facilitating. I apologize, Sharon, this is a little bit of a continuation of our conversation the other day, but I'm curious for each of you, are there any special highlight notes, or is there a singular highlight note that you would like to share from the workbook, particularly oriented toward diverse families in terms of gender balances or orientations or multiracial or things like that, that sometimes other books seem to forget exist?
Go ahead, Allison.
Well, I was just going to open the page, although it may take me a moment. It's a great question, Phoenix. Thanks so much for asking. In our chapter on identity, which again, there's nothing more complex than the human psyche and human identity formation. Like, in fact, the deeper you go in, the more complex it gets, right? It really does. So when we talk about the overlay of one's parental identity, and then the issues connected to adoption and permanency around the majority of children that are of diverse communities are adopted by Caucasian parents. And in a broadly Caucasian, more white conditioned environment, the issue of diversity and race and ethnicity is often minimized or not even seen and addressed. So it's one of the questionnaires we have around helping parents really just explore their own implicit biases and what things are they addressing and not addressing, and becoming much more sensitized to how they really are, in a very proactive way, assisting their child in feeling very connected, and in the kind of, how would I say, kind of the building of a positive racial and ethnic identity that comes from their traumatic losses, meaning these are whole familial trees I'm not connected to in an intimate way. So the losses are felt and experienced by the child through every developmental stage. This is not a small loss. It's a massive, complex loss. So while we can't erase the trauma and the traumatic losses connected to that, we wanted to take parents into an experience that isn't just reading something, but helping to unpack their own implicit biases in a very parent-friendly way. So identity has a number of activities and exercises really helping parents to explore much of that.
Okay, so Angela typed her question in. And either of you can answer, both of you can. Can you briefly touch on some of the best practices you'd suggest for starting this support group in a virtual environment, because that's probably what it's going to be. Best practices.
I think you certainly reach out to the community and give them an opportunity to, and various agencies. I know you're in private practice, Angela. I would reach out to attorneys and agencies and indicate that you would like to help families to prepare for success. It would be two different groups, one for those that are beginning the process and those that are in the trauma trenches. And to be able to say that we're going to be basing our group on this workbook, and it's a real opportunity for you to, I come down with Allison to come out with a hopeful, positive, loving, successful experience. And the way to do that is to delve first into what you bring to the parenting experience, or have brought to the parenting experience. I don't know what you would say, Allison. Allison.
Sorry, I just want to redirect that question a little bit, because that was actually an earlier question, and I just want to bump up Angela's question, which is talking about the structure you have designed in each chapter. So she noted, or Angela noted, the focus each chapter on the parent, then of course, the chat box is being weird now while I'm trying to help with this.
That's okay, Phoenix. I see it too. Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah, so I'll read it just so everybody can hear it. Sorry about the audio. My question is, could you talk about the structure you have designed in each chapter? I noted a focus on each chapter that on the parent, and then the mind, heart, and body, and at last the child. I definitely want to address that. This workbook, 250 pages that just came out, is built for the parent. Every part of it is built for the parent. The workbook Allison's working on solo, because Sharon fully retired, you hear my little, is going to be, in fact, it's due at the end of this month. So I've been working on it for about a year. The first half is for the latency age child. The second half, which is a much bigger, much more intensive half, is built for the adolescent. It has a relatively similar flow and kind of appearance, but really that's for the child and the teen. So this book is really exclusively built for the parent, and each chapter is constructed based on the 7 core issues. There's 7 chapters. So loss, that whole chapter, in fact, it's a very big, comprehensive chapter, is built to help kind of deconstruct someone's loss history, and then have a strength-based approach about how to address some of those losses, acknowledge potentially losses we've never acknowledged or really healed from or helped to address within ourselves. So it's also a skill building. So usually questionnaires are built to kind of unpack and explore issues, and then skill building experiential tools and exercises are built so the parent can put things into practice, which is really important. It's not like reading a theoretical book where we're like, oh, that's nice, but I don't know how to put anything into, what do I do on my dance floor, my attachment dance floor? Where do I put my hand? Where do I put my foot? How am I moving with my child in this serve and return? So the structure of the book is built to give kind of knowledge-based and exploration activities, while then focused on things the parent can put into practice.
Allison, before I move to the next question, and we have just a few, and I think we have enough time, do you want to add anything about Ty asked about best practices for starting a virtual support group? Anything you wanted to add to what Sharon said, and then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, and I facilitate a support group, which I've been facilitating a long time. So it's a great question. I commend you, Ty, for doing it. I wish every professional on the planet focused and that has experience in this arena would do a support group for parents in the trenches. I think parents don't get enough support. And when I think about best practices, there's a couple things I try to make sure is kind of integrated into our support group. One, the support group isn't for Allison. If I'm doing the support group, it's really a support group where first I might even need to let folks vent. I'm not going to be judging words. I'm not going to be, they don't have to say things perfectly. Maybe I need to vent about my child. If I'm drowning and I'll use my metaphor, if I'm drowning in the deep end of the pool as a parent, I'm not going to be mincing words and feeling like you have to say it perfectly. Or lots of our parents come in and they're venting because they're drowning and they might be angry and they're hurt so it's a safe place for parents to really emote and really unpack whatever they're experiencing. If they're in crisis, I want this group for them. And I want the group built so other parents, maybe some of our veteran parents that maybe aren't drowning anymore, maybe they're on the outside of the pool, they have a lot of experience and they're like, oh, I recognize that because I have that lived experience, that they can come in and really support that person. And we have that happen all the time in our support group where someone will say, oh, do you want to meet for coffee tomorrow? Or how can I support you? So it doesn't always need to feel overly therapeutic. I think that's what I would say to the therapist. I think sometimes we have a tendency to over therapize. And I think we're building a supportive space where we can meet parents where they are in crisis and help them with some tools to manage and get through that crisis and build a supportive network. Because doing this in the trauma trenches can be isolating. What we find is parents pull back and they isolate, they hunker down, they constrict away from, and it's very lonely and can feel very shaming. So to reach out continuously and say, this is the group for you, and you don't need to be a perfect parent. In fact, I don't even want perfect parents. Come in and be really imperfect. And we're creating a space and we're building that group around what the parents say they need from us. So if they need a whole group around loss, hey, we have great exercises in this workbook on let's explore our own losses, because it really isn't all about the child. Half the dance is me in this serve and return attachment dance. So I need time and space to explore me and my triggers and my needs. And I would love our community to build more of those resources for our parents and our families.
And I know before we end our time, I love Joanna Rojo's question.
Next up, Joanna Rojo. We're going to read it. I'll read it out. Are there any tips or approaches you recommend when offering this as a resource to parents who are defensive and struggle to hear that they may need to work on their own responses, the "my child is the problem" kind of recognition?
Yeah.
I'm with you, Sharon. That's a good one.
Yeah, and I have to say, for years I ran support groups and particularly one for 25 years that was geared towards open adoptive built families. And the best way to address people's resistance is to have them attend support groups with people who've been there and done that and maybe felt that way. So if you have support groups going on, Joanna, those families who are resistant and say, it's not about me, it's about my kid, fix my kid, or I didn't come in to adopt a child thinking I was going to have to examine myself. I'm okay. I've parented before. What do I need to know? Those folks do really well in a support group where they hear other people talking about the fact that they felt that way and how surprised they were to see how things unfolded for them and how they needed to go back and look at their own triggers. It's very difficult for folks who are either coming in and offering themselves to be a resource for children to imagine that they have to do any work. After all, I'm here out of the goodness of my heart. And why are you asking me to, in some ways, go into therapy by doing this book? But I think if they're with others who are down the road, it softens that resistance and helps them to understand why it would be to their benefit, that it isn't the same as parenting children that perhaps they birthed into the family. So that would be my recommendation, is to find or develop a really good support group of people who are struggling in the trenches, who could join with them and help them understand how their own insights help them to change the behaviors of their children.
Okay, Allison, anything? We have just one more question, and I think if you guys can make it just a minute answer, but at least we'll address it. I think it would be great, and we'll wrap up. Cindy Rowe is saying she's working with adopted parents of young adult adopted persons who sometimes feel it's too late to really help. Is it too late, guys?
Oh, no. In fact, let me lean into that one. As someone that works with adult adoptees, the traumatic losses are lifelong and intergenerational. Identity and searching reunion and all these themes that kind of span across one's lifetime. I do a support group for adult adoptees, and it's for me a constant reminder of how much pain comes from the traumatic losses. I have a few late discovery adoptees, and that still happens in this country, where children aren't told. Remember the two S's in adoption, the secrecy and the shame. We can't build an identity on top of secrecy and shame. And a lot is withheld from adoptees. So how do we build an identity when so much of their truth and the truth of their story is withholded from them? So sometimes we're creating more challenges for the adoptee, because you can't build an authentic self when you feel deceived or people are withholding parts of your story, or you're so disconnected from all the parts of your story. So supportive mechanisms across the lifespan. I'm really passionate about our resources for adult adoptees. So I really appreciate those folks that specialize in helping support the ongoing healing of our adult adoptee population. Also, if you want the information about the support group that I do, it's a Zoom support group. So any adult adoptee, you can go to my website and I'll send you the information. You can email me.
Okay,
And I wish we did more
Allison.
of that. Yes.
The other thing the last thing I'll say addressing that question is we've seen the successes of dealing with adult adoptees. I will say that I'm proud and delighted to say a little bit of that has happened in my own family. So I want to wrap it up by also saying that the best thing I can say about this workbook is, boy, do I wish I had it when my kids were growing up. Big time. So we are all lucky to have it now. So whatever we can do to get the word out. It is about getting the book out, but in the end, that's not the goal. In the end, the goal is to help the field to deal with the people who we are trying to help, and that's why we are all here. And certainly, absolutely, it is why NCAP was formed. Because we do have to aim for family success. We can see from this conversation that just placement as a goal is insufficient. That's the work we want to do. That's the work you guys do. We're proud to be with you on the mission. So with that, thank you all. Please take a look at the website. Send us your comments. If you want to send me any comments, and I got one in the chat to help us do these webinars a bit more smoothly. My email address is apertman. You see my name up there, apertman@ncap-us.org. You can also Google me. I'm very findable. So thank you to our executive director, Allison, who could not be more proud to have with us. To Sharon, who is one of the smartest people I've ever met and has helped to change our lives in big ways, and we're very grateful to her for that. And thank you all for what you do and for attending today.
Thank you, Adam.
Take
Thank
care,
you,
one and all.
everybody. Have a good day.
Bye.